Hi everyone, Trina Phoenix here, and this is going to be 3.0 of the Return of the Divine Sophia by Tricia McCannon. And we were getting into chapter 12, and the descent is the goddess and the descent to the underworld. And this is page 228 for some of you who wanted to read along. So here we go. More about Shasta's house. This is, I think, the third meeting. So, the goddess and the descent into the underworld. I am the single radiance by which all is aroused and within which is vibrant. For the man who has found me, the door to all things stands open. I am the magnetic force of the universal presence and the ceaseless ripple of its smile. The Theodhard de Chardin, the hum to the eternal feminine. I returned to the goddess circle on the morning of March 23rd. It was the spring equinox, and the weather was truly splendid. A sweet breeze blew through the city, and I could almost smell the fresh grass rising from the earth. Even in my walks around the city park, that lay only 2 blocks from my midtown house, I had taken Shasta's admonitions seriously to spend more time in nature. So, several days a week, I took walks through the Piedmont Park, Atlanta's Central Park. It had acres of rolling hills and oak trees, and a huge lake that attracted Canadian geese and ducks. I found that the walks gave me time to think about the deeper things at the center of my life, and when I stopped to meditate beneath the grandmother oaks, a sense of stillness would come over me. And it made it easy to hear my spirit guides. But it was often Regal's voice that spoke to me, not Ariel. And I found myself reflecting on my attachment to God in its masculine form. Sometimes I wasn't sure how to relate to the Divine Mother, for I had never been taught to do so. That morning of the spring equinox was glorious. Our group of women met outside in the grove, and Shasta took us through all the many winding paths of the lower and higher gardens, pointing out numerous symbols of spring. There was a statue of a painted mother goose and her little family of chicks, hidden among the young grasses of a family of stone bunny rabbits, and pastel Easter eggs tucked beneath fallen logs. Statues of the goddess in many of her sacred forms. They all graced the grove, and long garlands and flowers swung from the branches, while the whole world seemed to quiver with the radiance of new life. Wow. At about 11 o'clock, the women settled onto the benches, the chairs, and the old gliding swing on one of the grove's many nooks and crannies. Each spring, Shasta began, we celebrate the vernal equinox. This is the time when the day and the night are of equal length. And in the goddess teachings, this is the moment when Persephone returns from the underworld and Aphrodite comes back from the waters of the deep. It is also the season when the animals begin to mate and the birds begin to sing their songs that stimulate the growth of all living things. This is also the season when the great solar lords, like Adonais, Atitis, Mithra, Jesus, and Tammuz were all reborn. Easter. I thought, of course, the time of resurrection, as Shasta spoke. I found myself wondering if there was also a myth about the resurrection of the goddess. Spring is the season of the youth or the maiden, the rebirth of Mother Earth, and the green god of renewal. From this time onward, the sun grows strong until we reach the summer solstice. Sorry, puppies. The summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year. 6 weeks later, we celebrate Lungnasash, the feast day of the goddess. This high holy day was dedicated to Demeter or Isis, and it's the feast of the fruits and flowers. Cody, come here. Come here. Come here. You guys stop playing when I'm trying to do videos, you know. I know, and then you're going to talk. Seriously? Okay, just give me a few minutes here. Shasta went on. Sorry about that, guys. I love my puppy so. Okay, Shasta went on. Because it's spring today, I want to share with you some of the tales of those who've descended into the underworld and returned to the light. We know the story through Jesus, but there are other heroes or heroines who took part in the early ages. As I recount these stories, I want you to consider that these tales are both truth and allegory. For many have gone down into the depths of hell to find their love, to save their world, or to be reborn. In the ancient world, we find this story in the story of Orpheus, the famous harpist who was the founder of the Orphic mysteries that predate the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece. Orpheus goes out in the search of his beloved wife, Eurydice, who perished on their wedding day. Following her into Hades, Orpheus plays his celestial music for the king of hell. His songs are so beautiful that Hades, the king of hell, is moved into tears. He agrees to release Orpheus's wife, but only on one condition. Orpheus cannot gaze upon her until they have reached the mortal plane. He resists this temptation despite her piteous cries. But at the last possible moment, Orpheus turns, and when he does, he loses her forever. What was the significance of this story? I wondered, but before I could ask, Shasta continued. The Orphic mysteries were one of many mystery schools across the ancient world that taught about the many planes of the dimensional reality and how sound, the underlying principle, is what governs all worlds. I nodded. This was like the teachings of the Viraji masters, I thought, who taught of the wisdom of the audible life stream. This underlying sound permeates the universe, she said. I've heard this sound, and it is amazing. And it is the Divine Mother existing in the heart of all things. It is a sound with which all beings can commune. And it is linked to the Holy Spirit, the daughter principle of God. This was interesting. What did she mean, the daughter principle? Shasta went on, but the stories of heroes who save a person, a city, or a world are not just confined to men. They can also be found in the story of Psyche, a girl who was loved by a god and who ascended into heaven. Do any of you know of this tale? Several women shook their heads. I remembered something about Psyche and Cupid from Greek myths, but the details were hazy, like the tale of Persephone, Shasta said. Psyche's tale has often been misunderstood. Psyche was a beautiful woman who some said was more beautiful than Aphrodite herself. She is, of course, the goddess in her human mortal form, unable to find a mate worthy of her. When her village is being ravaged by a fire-breathing dragon, Psyche volunteers to sacrifice herself so that the village might be saved. She is escorted by the town's constables and left in chains to die on a mountainside. But Cupid, or Eros, the son of Aphrodite, accidentally pricks his finger on one of his own arrows and falls madly in love with her. Unwilling to see her perish, Eros frees Psyche from her chains and whisks her away to a place in the clouds. Here the god Eros symbolizes the saving grace of unconditional love, and his kingdom is neither in heaven nor on earth, but lies somewhere in between. Eros leaves Psyche in his place to be waited on by invisible servants. He orders that she be lavished with all the manner of luxuries, but he only comes to visit her at night to make love. Eros, one request is that Psyche not look upon him directly, for he is afraid that the illumination of his countenance could blind her. This was getting interesting now. Love, romance, immortal gods, and now sex. But eventually, Psyche's two sisters discovered that she was alive, and jealous of her good fortune, they urge her to find out whether she is sleeping with a god or a monster. Eventually, Psyche succumbs to her sisters and doubts, and lights a candle to look upon her lover's face as Eros lies sleeping. There she beholds the most beautiful young man she has ever seen, the god of love himself. But in her haste, she spills 3 beads of hot wax on the covers, and Cupid awakens. Horrified that she has broken her vow, Eros tells her that they must now be parted forever. Psyche is heartbroken. Shasta looked around the circle at our faces. Well, what happened next? Realizing that her own fears and doubts have sabotaged her and her sacred marriage, Psyche prays to the gods and the goddesses for grace. Aphrodite, Cupid's mother, decrees that this grace can only be accorded if Psyche undertakes and completes a series of 4 impossible tasks. Heartbroken, Psyche decides to accept this challenge. she enters into a long series of tests that can only be accomplished by going to the underworld and facing her shadow. Eventually, through many tribulations, Psyche triumphs, but only with the assistance of Mother Nature. The Holy Spirit recognizes Psyche's divine nature, even though Psyche does not remember it, and Mother Nature sends assistance to help her accomplish her many seemingly impossible tasks. Psyche eventually completes her labors and is granted access to heaven, becoming an immortal herself. Wow! So Psyche represents the purest aspect of us all, the divine part that can be saved through the intervention of God's true love. But even that is not enough. Ultimately, Psyche must connect with her own spiritual powers and her own personal will to find her way back to heaven. Shasta explained, like all human beings, Psyche is a mortal who had forgotten who she was. But because her heart was full of beauty and love, she earned the grace of divine love. Yet it is only through her own efforts and the generosity of Mother Earth that Psyche is able to find her love again and reclaim her place in heaven. Placed in the context of the mysteries, which often used myth, parable, and metaphor to convey deep spiritual truths. This is a simple story, and it finally made sense. Meg and Sharon were nodding their heads, too. Shasta allowed us a few minutes to share our thoughts, and then we proceeded to elaborate. While Psyche's tale is an important one, there is an even more enduring legend that I wish to share today about the descent of the Queen of Heaven into the underworld. This is the tale of Ishtar and Tammuz, and it was one of the earliest stories in the mystery schools, for Ishtar and Tammuz are the first telling of the story of Romeo and Juliet. The little that I knew about Ishtar came from my investigations into the Old Testament. I knew she was a goddess of love, war, and fertility, and her husband, or love, had been Tammuz. I also remembered that Ishtar had been one of the three goddesses who had appeared to me so long ago. So I was curious to hear her tale. Shasta began. Ishtar was one of the great queens of heaven, the granddaughter of Enlil, king of the gods. Tammuz was a noble shepherd king who had first brought the teachings of the animal husbandry to humankind. Both of them were royalty from the long-lived race of the Anunnaki gods, who seeded this planet thousands of years ago. The Anunnaki, or the Anakim, as they were known in the Bible, were also called the Shining Ones, because their light skin and hair. Their skin actually glows with light from within. While some of the gods were more selfish or egocentrically oriented, Tammuz was not. He was a kindly minstrel, a poet, a shepherd, a noble, a king, who was associated with the tree of life. He was also known as Dumuzi. And it is also said that he ruled Mesopotamia for some 40,000 years. Tammuz taught the arts of animal husbandry to humankind and was deeply loved by all who knew him. Because Ishtar and Tammuz were from different sides of the feuding factions within the ranks of the gods, their love was not only unexpected, but it was forbidden. But after a long period of courting, they gained permission from their rival families to marry. I could see that Shasta was now warming up to this legend. Shasta went on, but one day, while hunting, Tammuz was gored by a wild boar and died. This meant that Tammuz was forced to descend into the underworld. Overcome by grief, Ishtar decided to follow Tammuz into Hades, knowing that such a journey might cost her her life. Telling only her sister where she was going, Ishtar began her perilous descent. But to reach Hades, she had to pass through the 7 gates of hell, and at each gate she would be forced to give away a part of her divine power. When she arrived at the first gate, the guardian recognized her immediately and greeted her, saying, "Hail, Ishtar, Queen of Heaven. What are you doing here? You are not dead. You have not died. You have no need to go into the underworld." But Ishtar bowed and addressed the guardian with respect. "Brave gatekeeper, I come to find my beloved Tammuz. He has died and left the cities of heaven. Have you seen him? Has he passed this way?" The gatekeeper nodded yes, "But I cannot permit you to pass while you still wear your diadem of sacred illumination." He was talking about her crown, the crown that let her see into the other worlds. Slowly, Ishtar reached up and took off her diadem. "Gladly I will give up the crown of heaven for the sake of love," she murmured. "Then you may pass," the gatekeeper said, bowing as he let her by. At the second gate, Ishtar was greeted by the next guardian, and at this time the gatekeeper ordered her to give up her necklace of speech. This was not the power to speak as mortals do, but the power to communicate and command creation with the word. Once again, Ishtar yielded up her powers for the sake of love. At the third gate, Ishtar was asked to surrender her bracelets of manifestation and the golden wristbands that allowed her to manifest her heart's desire. Inclining her head in submission, she took off her golden bands and passed through. Then at the fourth gate, Ishtar was asked to surrender her bejeweled girdle, which amplified the power of her third chakra, which is solar. "It was probably a belt like Wonder Woman," Claudia giggled, and we laughed, totally caught up by the story. Maybe this was where Wonder Woman's magic belt had come from. I reflected, maybe our comic book heroes had so many attributes that were taken from the early myths of the gods. At the fifth gate, Ishtar was made to yield her royal scepter, the means through which she could command the elements. At the sixth gate, she relinquished her sandals, the golden shoes that gave her the power to fly. Finally, at the seventh gate, Ishtar was asked to surrender the golden tunic that made her impervious to death. Thus, naked and alone, Ishtar arrived in the underworld. Naked, mortal, and completely vulnerable. Uh-oh, we all took a breath. Was this the story about us? About immortal souls who had arrived on Earth without any protection or powers, feeling completely naked and alone? Shasta went on. Now, one of the things that happened when people come into the underworld is that they begin to lose their memories, just as souls do when we are born into Earth. So Ishtar knew that she had to take a little time to locate Tammuz, or she would forget her purpose. At last she found that he was being held prisoner by Erekingal, the queen of the underworld. This was Ishtar's jealous half-sister. And there had long been rivalry between these two queens. because she had once ruled in the realm of light, while the other ruled the kingdom of shadows. When Ishtar found Tammuz's prison, she implored the guard to release him, but the jailer refused for fear that he would be punished by Eros Cupid. Then, please let me see him, Ishtar begged. At least you can do that. The guard agreed, letting her into the dark prison where Tammuz was locked in a lonely cell. Ishtar threw herself across the prison bars, crying, "Tammuz, Tammuz, I have found you." The young king stood up, came to the bars to meet his lovely lady, but he no longer recognized her. He looked at her through the prison bars and saw that she was beautiful, kind, and loving. There was something familiar about her, but he could not remember who she was. Tammuz felt a strange longing rise within his chest, and tears came to his eyes. "Forgive me, lady," he said, placing his hands on hers through the bars. "I feel this stirring in my heart, but I do not know where we have met. I know that I am feeling love, but I do not know who it is that I am loving." His kind eyes seemed to melt her heart. Was it possible that he had really forgotten who she was? She wondered, how could this happen? Ishtar remembered that when most souls lost their memories, when they came into this land. "I am your wife, your sweetheart, and your soulmate. Don't you remember me, my love?" The prince gazed deeply into her eyes. "I'm sorry, lady, I do not. Your face is one that I have seen in my dreams, but I cannot remember who you are." This was too much for Ishtar. Tears spilled down her cheeks until she could barely see. "Tammuz, you must remember. You were lost, but now you are found." The prince placed a hand upon his heart. "Lady, I know that I am lost, but I no longer remember where my home is." Ishtar wept. "Your home is in heaven, my love, and you must leave this prison now before it is too late." Tammuz looked regretful. "I have no power to leave here on my own. Only the Queen of Shadows can release me now." Ishtar could not believe her ears. Tammuz had forgotten his own divine nature and did not know that he had come from heaven. He was trapped into a world of amnesia and shadows. Slowly, Ishtar wiped her eyes. "Then I will do it for you, Tammuz," she cried. "I know who you are, and I know you must awaken from the dream." She laced her fingers into his and kissed his lips. For a long moment, something stirred inside of him. Then it was gone. "Until I return, my love," she promised. "Don't forget me. I will return, I promise." The garden and the circle of women had become very quiet, as if even the animals were listening to the story. We were all there in the underworld prison with Ishtar. It seemed all too real to me. The love, the longing, the forgetting, I knew them all too well. I had been there in many relationships, hoping to save a man I loved from the pain of his own making. Shasta continued. So, Ishtar traveled to the place of the Queen of Shadows, who sat upon her throne with red flames burning all around her. Couriers dressed in black glided to and fro in the great hall as Ishtar waited for an audience. At least she was summoned before Eros Cupid, wearing only a robe that the stewards of the court had given her to hide her nakedness. But now Ishtar had begun to lose her own memories, so all she could remember was that she had come to free her beloved soulmate, Tammuz. Ishtar knelt before the Dark Queen's throne and bowed. "Your Majesty." "Rise," Eros commanded, seeing that her hated half-sister was before her for the first time in submission. "Why have you come to the underworld, and why are you here?" Ishtar raised her chin. I have come to ask you to release Tammuz from prison. That is all I can remember. That is all I know. Kingal realized that her half-sister Ishtar had succumbed to the same amnesia that grips even the immortals who enter the world of light and shadows. Ishtar was completely in her power. This was going to be delightful to finally torture her to finally torture her overconfident sister. And what if I do not release him? Eros Cupid spat out. You have no power in this land. What are you going to do about it? Bravely, Ishtar lifted her chin and answered, better to remain on earth where love is than to return to heaven where love is not. This was the last thing that she had expected. Was Ishtar saying that she would rather remain in the world of shadows than to reign in heaven? That Ishtar would give up the power for the sake of love? This was not the way that she remembered her proud sister. Yes, there was love in her land. Even though you had to look for it, there were birds and flowers, life and beauty, even though immortals did not often come here. If Ishtar could see beauty in the simple creatures of earth, then perhaps Eros Cupid had misjudged her after all. The queen rose from her chair and began to give her famous speech. Blessed are those who love my sweet earth, who love the clear running waters, the smell of fresh soil, the grace of the stag, and the majesty of the lion. Blessed are those who can see the divine beauty in all nature, and who know there is no separation from heaven. Eros Cupid, sorry, that name is really tough for me, lifted her arms and gave Ishtar back her memory. Suddenly, Ishtar realized where she was and who she was kneeling before. She rose to her feet and opened her arms in welcome. Come, my sweet sister, I embrace you as myself. The two sisters came together in the understanding, two aspects of the Great Mother who encompass all things. The light and the dark were returned into balance. And this is the picture that she drew. That's a neat story. Okay. And the lovers were reunited in sacred union, returning to heaven in celebration and love. When Shasta finished, no one spoke. I reached up to discover that there were tears on my cheeks. How had they gotten there? Why had that story affected me so powerfully? I did not know. I realized then that many of us had been holding our breath. Maybe I was crying because this was the story of my mother's life, of my own, the story of all of us, in fact. We come from the heavenly worlds, vulnerable and alone. We are stripped of our memories, our powers, and we begin to search for love, only to lose it again and again. We find a person we can connect with here or there, but we can't seem to recall who they are or who we are to one another. We feel trapped in the world of illusion. We can't remember how to get out. And when our loved ones are in trouble, we throw ourselves into helping them get out of hell, even at the risk of being completely mirrored in the darkness ourselves. Finally, if we are lucky, we wake up before it's too late. And sometimes the person whom we love, the person who is trapped, gets to go free as well. I wiped another set of tears away, unable to get rid of this lump in my throat. it seemed like the story of my own wonderful mother who had gone to hell to rescue my father from alcoholism. It was also the story of my brave sister who was coping with a bipolar son she had tried to rescue again and again. And the story of my cousin who had spent years taking care of her paraplegic husband, who emotionally abused her. And if I was honest, I had seen this pattern played out once or twice in my own life as well, with men that I had tried to save. As I glanced around the circle, I could see that all the other women were similarly affected. No one wanted to break the spell by speaking. Shasta rose to her feet. Today, we want to create a healing ceremony for all the wounded warriors of the world, the ones lost in the darkness of their pain or suffering. Many of these, whether male or female, are still locked in the prison of shadows. Let us awaken the sleepers from their cells and pray for their release today. We rose to our feet as one, and without words we each picked up a gourd rattle. Shasta lifted her drum, finding a rhythm and time with our hearts. And then the song from the mystical artist Sophia began. May the warrior find peace within, that the wars of the nations end. Send the love and light into the earth, that the world may find complete rebirth. Let the sufferings of the nations end, that the healing of the earth begins. All right, guys. That's beautiful. Wow. I want to do that one more time. May the warriors find peace within, that the wars of the nations end. Send the love and light into the earth, that the world may find complete rebirth. Let the sufferings of the nations end, that the healing of the earth can begin. That's beautiful. Wow. We should focus on that once a day. That's a beautiful, beautiful affirmation of positive love, healing energy to be sent to the whole world. It's just beautiful. We danced our way through all the trails of the garden, following the many twists and turns. This was like our own circuit path to God. I thought full of the good and the bad and the tragic. And as the song sank into each one of our hearts, it seemed as if we were singing for all of the suffering in the world. I thought about all the people who were trapped in bondage, either by their own choices or through circumstances beyond their control. I thought of the wounded warriors who, like my father, had fought in 2 world wars and paid the price because the pain was so great that he had fallen into depression, anger, and alcoholism, and despair. And it was not only the centuries of suffering, soldiers who had maimed and killed each other in battle, all in the name of righteous glory. It was also the dualistic mindset of the politicians and generals who believed that confrontation, war, destruction, and aggression were the only way that life could be lived. Whether good men with good intentions or fantasies, these people, or fanatics, whether good men with good intentions or fanatics, these people had been conditioned to believe that the world was a place where fear, domination, and horror had to reign. Those who were different from ourselves were something to be defended against or attacked. Nature was an obstacle to be conquered and subdued. Animals, forests, and people were merely commodities to be sacrificed in a winner-takes-all scenario. In the end, everybody loses. The soldiers, the wives, the children, the civilians, and the earth herself that became so polluted with the bombs and the bullets and the fires and the grenades that this was the price of the patriarchal system that we had now put into place. A paradigm of struggle which did not honor the living spirit that resides in all things. Next, we will get into stepping back from the picture. All right, guys, I love you. I hope you enjoyed that. I think that is a beautiful, profound truth of what has happened and where we're sitting. And it's time for us to start to bring forth the love of nature and the love of one another. And start to really get ready to maybe get a little bit more connected with her by growing some food, growing some plants, planting some small trees, and then just sending them where they should go or giving them away. Because we've had a lot of fire and a lot of flood and a lot of things happening. So right now, it might be time to bring some nature into our homes, grow it, nurture it, love it, and then take it back out where it belongs when things start to balance out a little bit. Because right now, we're in a little bit of a rocky boat, and we might be for a little bit. Not too long, but for a little bit. So with that, balance sometimes requires transition, and transition sometimes is a little bumpy. So with that, be ready for the changes that hopefully we can see happen upon this earth, because it's so out of balance, and I think that we are the ones that came here to restore it. So I love you with the bottom of my heart and soul and being, and I am so honored to be a part of such an amazing group of people. So namaste, and may love and joy and favor be with you all today and always.